I think you are all aware of the last words I ever spoke to Vladimir Putin. Vladimir, get out of Ukraine. There's something else happened. That wasn't the whole conversation. I'll let you in on the whole conversation for those who have never heard the story. I didn't put this out, by the way. We were together, we found ourselves together, a group of leaders in a green room prior to the G20 summit, and he came over. And, I said to him, Vladimir, get out of Ukraine. The Russians put out this story. I normally don't talk about private events. The Russians put out the story. I don't know why. They put out this story, but anyway, what actually happened, there was the rest of it. I said, Vladimir, get out of Ukraine. What happened next? He looked at me with that smirk he gets when he's just been accused of poisoning someone. And he said to me, but I'm not in Ukraine. Oh. To which I said, well, Vladimir, that is why it is a waste of my time to talk to you. And I didn't know at the time, I read later what Teddy Roosevelt said about dealing with the Russians and Russian leaders. And I wish I'd known that at the time. Teddy Roosevelt said, the worst thing about dealing with Russian leaders is that they will lie to you even when they know that you know they are lying. Anyway, and of course it was mentioned even before that particular event, I had led the charge in the end successfully to have Putin expelled from the G8. So I'm not on his Christmas card list. In fact, Russia is one of the very few countries in the world today where Harper and Associates cannot do business. But still, people often ask me, what is Putin like? And when people ask me that, because I spent a lot of years with Putin in a lot of meetings, they are invariably expecting, if not soliciting, from me a highly negative evaluation. The fact of the matter is, though, friends, I have never taken Putin lightly. And I'll tell you that Putin is in many ways a very impressive individual. The first thing you're struck by when you met Putin are his eyes. They are bright, they are intelligent, and they are dead cold. All of his thoughts, his words, and his actions exhibit extraordinarily high levels of personal discipline. Although I did tell once, I can tell you this, I had a unique capacity to get under his skin. I did get under his skin once to a sufficient degree. I guess this was around the time I started referring to the G7+1. He got under his skin to such a degree that he actually called me a Trotskyite. Instead of a Trotskyite. All I told Vladimir was that. I said, look, Vladimir, of all the insults I've received in my political career, that is the most unique. But certainly, Putin, just to be clear, Putin never enters a meeting, an international meeting, without being thoroughly briefed. One of the best briefed people in the world. And he doesn't enter without having a very clear objectives for the outcome of that meeting. His comprehensive of English is very good, although he seldom uses it. As a former intelligence officer, he is very quick to size people up, and in particular, he is very quick to spot weaknesses in character. Though he is quite personable, Putin is rarely very warm. He can even seem shy in social situations, and I never once saw him display any sense of humor. Although the late Deepak Oberoi told me he once saw Putin laugh at a very macabre joke. But anyway, that's Putin. How does he think? How does Vladimir Putin think? Putin's mindset has been shaped first and foremost by the fall of the Soviet Union. Remember that those events ended the careers and often the lives of most of the people that Putin knew professionally in his early years. It also began a decade of cataclysmic political, economic, and social decline for Russia. That is why Putin has called the USSR's disappearance, and you know the quote, the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. Given his KGB mindset, Putin sees those events as a series of foreign plots and domestic betrayals. Yet it is a mistake to think that Putin is still a communist. In fact, the Communist Party is his most consistent domestic political opponent. In Putin's mind, he is not a communist, he is a nationalist, or even in his mind, he is a conservative. He brandishes with pride his Russian Orthodox religion and his belief in business, although, of course, it is an organized crime rather than a free market version of business. And through that, as we all know, through the gangster model, Putin has made himself one of, if not the, richest person in the world. But Putin does not really want wealth. What Putin really wants is power. He wants power in the deepest personal sense, and understand this about Putin. He will never, ever relinquish it willingly or voluntarily. Do not believe the stories these Kremlin watchers you see about the recent maneuverings and how they might somehow mean that Putin will somehow give up power one day. He never will. Not as long as he is alive. And he never will. Because Putin is smart enough to know that when you have used power the way he has used power, you either keep it or you die. But Putin does also want power for a larger goal. The goal of restoring power to Russia and to Russians. It is not the Soviet Union that he wishes to recreate. It is the Russian Empire, albeit in modern form. And this is really the key to understanding Putin's agenda. It is essentially backward looking. He's a tactician, he's not a strategist. He has no forward vision for his country. He is building nothing in the way of institutions or other aspects of society that will outlast him. Internationally, he tries to advance Russia's power, and in a few places he has, but mostly remember what it is all about. It is all about undermining American power and undermining the Western alliance. That is in his mind. It's really all about getting revenge for the Cold War and trying to reverse its outcome. I watch up close two American presidents, both of whom I have great admiration for, George W. Bush and Barack Obama. I watched both American presidents go to great lengths to try and make Vladimir Putin a constructive partner. You can't. You can't because he doesn't want to be. It is not his objective. Yet, as we know, a third president in a row has also been trying. This is one of Putin's skills, by the way, to convince others that he is simply misunderstood. And that if he could, that he really could be an ally if only you tried a little bit harder. I figured this out pretty early on about Putin, and I want to remind you, I do have to say this, I want to remind you that most foreign policy commentators in and outside of government, I will not include our former ambassador in this, but most foreign policy commentators in this country, in government, in the media, etc., didn't figure this out until 2014. Some of you remember that as late as 2013, when I began publicly calling for Putin to be thrown out of the G8, I've been calling for it a few years before that, they were all saying that I was making a terrible mistake not trying to work with Putin. But they were not the only ones. They were not the only ones. I go back to, remember back in 2006, the NATO summit. President Bush and I, and frankly most of the other leaders, tried to get Ukraine into NATO. It was blocked by a small handful of allies. They blocked it because they did not want to offend Putin. You know, years later, and I have to tell you this, years later, after the invasions of the Crimea and the Donbass, one of those leaders tried to justify their position to me. That leader said to me, you know, Stephen, if we followed your advice and let Ukraine into NATO, we would now be at war with Russia. To which I said, no, if you followed my advice and Ukraine were part of NATO, this invasion never would have happened in the first place. I see it all the time. One of the great challenges of foreign policy is a leader has to have a vision for what the world should look like. And as a Canadian, those visions are obviously based on freedom, democracy, justice, the things on which our society stands for and the reasons for which it's flourished. But at the same time, you have to be realistic about the world that you're facing, about the people at the other side of the table, and what they are really like. You have to be able to recognize that Vladimir Putin is a dangerous person. But you also have to be able to recognize that Vladimir Putin is a dangerous person, but believe it or not, he is not a reckless person. He is an apparatchik. He is analytical, he is calculating, he is cautious. He does not wish to repeat Soviet overextensions, and he is a bully. Vladimir Putin will never enter a fight which he cannot win and win easily. By the way, that is the real reason why he didn't invade the rest of Ukraine, the non-Russian parts, when he probably could have. But friends, here's the good news. I said that when I talk about the big important developments in geopolitical events these days, I talk about Trump and I talk about Xi, and I don't talk very much about Putin. Yes, Putin is a player, but he is a player just in the sense that he is just a disruptor. He is a mercenary, a hacker, a rule breaker. He is prepared to make a deal with anyone naive enough to believe his rhetoric. But in the wider scheme of things, he is not that important outside of a few areas. He leads a rapidly declining power, and he is accelerating the decline of that power. Friends, a lot of people don't know, you probably know, a lot of Canadians don't even realize, that when we kicked Russia out of the G8, we kicked the smallest of the G8's economies out of that organization. Yes, the Russian economy, with almost 150 million people and some of the largest oil and gas reserves in the world, is smaller than the Canadian economy. It's incredible, but it is true. And that is one reason why I'm optimistic about Ukraine. Let's take the long view of history once again and go back to the War of 1812. It took over 100 years from the end of that war in 1815 for the United States and Canada to truly become allies and friends. In fact, for many decades following the war, Canadians prepared for another invasion. Fortifications were built, people were trained. As late as the early years of the 20th century, people still felt it was possible that we might face another American invasion. But eventually, with the failure of the first invasion, and more importantly, the defeat of the logic behind the invasion, the threat gradually subsided, and a different and, of course, more appropriate relationship emerged, one of the best in the world. This will happen in time with Russia. I may not see it, but someday the Putin era will end. And Russia's desire for a better life under better institutions with better friends in the world will emerge. And the logic of trying to annex a fundamentally different nation will ebb away. But for some time to come, we will have to be vigilant and we will have to be patient, just as you have been. You have really been. Indeed, in human history, there have been very few desires for nationhood that have been more thoroughly tested and proven more resilient than that of the Ukrainian nation. During my visits to Ukraine, as we saw in some of the films, I saw the memorials to Ukraine's tortured past, and I saw the testaments to its determination to endure. In Kiev, I visited the statue of Ukraine's national poet, Taras Shevchenko, persecuted by the Tsar for demanding freedom. I laid a wreath at the monument to the Holodomor, a deliberate mass murder by famine in which millions died. Millions died. And once again, it was mentioned earlier, but I'm proud to say that it was our government, and more explicitly, it was member of our caucus, James Bazan, who led the move to call the Holodomor what it was: Stalin's genocide against the Ukrainian people. doing that because we want to ensure that this horror and its victims are never, ever forgotten by humanity. I also visited in Europe, where another homicidal regime, the Nazis, killed thousands. In Lviv, as mentioned, I visited the Luhansky Street prison, where the restored Soviet regime interrogated, tortured, and subjected thousands of Ukrainian men, women, and even children to the most horrifying crimes. And of course, in the streets, I saw the pictures of the victims of the Maidan Revolution, fought against Putin's henchman, Yanukovych, only the most recent attempt by Russia's despots to bring Ukraine to heel. But long before I saw any of those things, I could see as a boy the Ukrainians that I knew in that era lived under a cloud of sadness. The Russian Empire, the Stalinist Holodomor, the Nazi occupation, the Soviet reoccupation. There was much, so much to be sad about. Not just lost opportunities, but lost generations and so many lost lives. Many people I grew up with in this country thought it would last forever. But never in my experience did Ukrainians think that. Nor, I might add, did anyone, I should add, in my Canadian conservative political tradition, that I am very proud of. Going back to John Diefenbaker, conservatives, we had no so-called peace missions to the Soviet Union. We sought no middle way between totalitarianism and freedom. We were not trying to play a so-called honest broker or neutral party between right and wrong. And when the time came, as Ukrainians always knew it would, it was a conservative government that was the first in the West, even before the fall of the Soviet Union, to recognize Ukrainian independence. Time and again, and as foreign affairs officials urged me, I can tell you they did, not our ambassador, but as foreign affairs officials urged me and urged our government to appease Russia, the various conservative parties over the years and the government that I led said, no, we will not, and we will not ever do that. You are honoring me tonight, and I am grateful for that. But in doing so, I always say with these are honors that really go to this country. The vast majority of whose citizens of all political persuasions have always stood by Ukraine, and which, under conservatives, as they say, always has. And I say, for the conservative leadership aspirants who are here tonight, I believe always will. Tonight by saying to you something I have said before, something I said many years ago. And it is this: we, like you, are determined that the journey forward for Ukraine will continue, and that there will be no going back. That journey began with the birth of freedom for those Ukrainians who came to Canada. Here Ukrainians experienced, sometimes through considerable hardship, all the opportunities that a free and democratic society has to offer. Other kinds of societies might, on occasion, satisfy their citizens' material needs, but they never satisfy their aspirations and their dreams. And so you have succeeded here in Canada, and as you have succeeded, your hopes for your struggling homeland have only grown stronger. In my political lifetime, you have journeyed back to Ukraine multiple times to monitor and protect free elections. You have sought ways to aid and to invest there, including supporting the free trade agreement that Ukraine concluded with my government. You have built memorials to the struggles of the past, embracing in particular that important monument in Ottawa to the tens of millions of victims of communism in Ukraine and around the world. You've backed efforts by our government to militarily reinforce outgunned Ukrainian soldiers, to persuade our allies to do more, and tonight, of course, to continue to aid the victims and the families of a Russian aggression that has never really ceased. Most of all, friends, you all know that we have all come too far, way too far from the horrors of Ukraine's past to ever allow it to go back. I do not know, you know, Yogi Berra said predictions are tough, especially about the future. I do not know how long the Kremlin will want to undermine Ukraine's stability, prosperity, and sovereignty. Is it like Canada's experience, a period that will last a century? Or will it be a millennium? Or could it be just a decade? I don't know. But I do know this. Ukrainian Canadians will continue the fight until it is concluded successfully and once and for all, and your fellow Canadian citizens will be standing beside you. Ukraine, like Canada, will one way or another be a land eventually of freedom, dignity, and true independence. I want to thank you for the invitation to be here tonight, for the opportunity to share these thoughts with you. I greatly admire the work you're all doing as part of the International Council in support of Ukraine and all of the organizations that it embraces, and I'm delighted to have had the opportunity to share these thoughts with you. God bless all of you. God bless Canada. Slava Ukraini.